Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. I am the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she and her, and it is great to have you with us again this week. We are back for another conversation around diversity, inclusion, and it's going to be another good one. So I'm going to bring in my friend and colleague, Jean Marie Nevada.
Hello, Liz. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have to ask, did you see today's Google Doodle?
I did not, but while you are hosting the show, I'm going to hop out and look at it.
You should definitely look. Everybody should go look. It is of Audre Lorde, and it is really, really fabulous and exciting. So I'm telling everybody about it. So go look at that. But you're coming back to join us for part of the conversation after Leticia and I get started, right?
We'll be back.
We'll see you in a little while. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jean Marie Nevada, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she and ella, who speak Spanish. Every single week, we get together to have a conversation about something interesting related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And this week, we are talking about nominations. Golden Globe nominations and looking at some of the shows that are getting press over the last week and talking about some of the shows that actually didn't. This week's article, if you are interested, was in Variety. The title of it was Awards Nominations. What awards nominations say about the need for further discussions about diversity. And that article is available at straightforequality.org/discussion series. And to have this discussion, Liz is going to be joining us in a little while. But first, I'm going to bring on one of my colleagues and the only person I know who gets excited about poetry at the Super Bowl like I do, Leticia Mitchell.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jean Marie. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for being willing to come out and play again. It's always fun when you come to visit.
Thank you. So, yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about. So the article covered a lot about what's getting nominated this year. And one of sort of the big takeaways were there were a lot of people and a lot of programs and films and media nominated this year, especially in the African-American space, where we were seeing more of it than we ever have in the past. In fact, multiple times the number of nominees that we've seen in past years. So my question to you is, does this actually mark progress, or is this something that we should be a little bit concerned about sustaining?
Yeah. So it's a mark of progress from where we are in terms of there has already been a sustained conversation. I do want to recognize that. So we've been in this so on full, right? So the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite probably started maybe about 4 years ago. At this point. And so there was a lot of energy prior to that. And so there's been a sustained energy since then around what we're paying attention to, and also what shows can get made and what shows are getting made. And so it's sort of there is something there are some shifts happening, but it's unclear what they mean. And the award shows are a hard barometer to use for that. Like the award shows are always, they're never, the nominations and the talk around them is much more interesting than actually what happens with the nominations, and certainly what happens with the broadcasts. Absolutely not all that interesting. But they only can lift up, because they're limited by number, they're only going to lift up a certain number of things. And it's always like everyone is like, all of a sudden becomes a pig at the trough, just sort of everyone's trying to feed together in the lowest form, right, to get a nomination. It's very weird. The fact that nominations matter is actually something that we need to talk about, because they do actually matter in the industry. It's how you get to continue making shows, how you get to continue making television. And that doesn't matter whether you're in front of the camera or behind the camera. They matter tremendously that way, right? In effect, you're building a CV and demonstrating, right, that kind of industry clout. So they do matter, but we probably should think about ways. I think hopefully the next step in this is how can we move away from thinking, having everything hinged on what's happening in the award season, because it's a very low barometer for what's going on. Yeah.
And it requires means. I mean, things that get nominated tend to be things that had a big machine behind them pushing for visibility. And so I think it sometimes makes smaller productions a lot harder to get that visibility. So I think your point of it shouldn't just be about the nominations that starts this conversation. Yeah. So we sort of talked about the raw numbers. So there are a lot more people, and it's not just actors, and it's not just the actual properties, but it's even behind the scenes. We're seeing a lot of difference in who was nominated. But the question that I actually want to get to, which I think is a far more interesting one, is the breadth of the stories that we see being recognized. Not only is there more stuff, but my question to you is, the stuff that's out there, is it telling more diverse stories? Is it telling more complicated stories? Is it just telling stories of trauma? Are we seeing different things?
Yeah, so we're finally moving away from a lot of stories of trauma, and you and I have talked about this. So that there is a tendency to focus, certainly in the LGBTQ space, on stories that had to do with AIDS, and there was always a death was necessary, and that moved over from literary conventions and things like that, and certainly within African American experience and how that then gets translated into representation coming out of Hollywood, that there has always typically been a focus on trauma, and there still is, but we are seeing more things. So blessings, things like the hashtag Black Joy has really, and Black Girl Magic, those things have really, really helped spark different kinds of conversations and let people know that we want to see different things. And so it's not that people hadn't been presenting these stories to producers trying to get them greenlit before. It's just that now people are recognizing that, oh, in fact, somebody wants to see this. And, and some of this, I will, jokingly refer to it as, why can't we live? And the stories that help answer that question is like, yes, we do in fact live from day to day. It is not all struggle and strife. There's plenty of that, to be sure, but we've always had to cultivate spaces and ways to be joyful and happy, and we do just we live. So it's great to have some of that, and so we're getting some of that, as well as some really beautifully, wonderfully complicated things that give us complicated stories in these really beautiful organic ways that might be pointed, but that always are really going for balance. So I'm really thinking, one thing I'm thinking of is McQueen's beautiful series, Small Acts, and you have to really work your way through all of that to really get it. So you get the very pointed commentary, but he's always careful to balance that. This is what community looked like in those spaces at that time period, right? It sounded like this. There is so much detail around the music that's being played, and it's very particular, it's very specific in each one of those episodes, and it's like that music would not carry over to those same folks in Brixton would not be listening to the same music that those people in London are listening to, right? And so there's all of that, and so it's just really rich and lovely, and there's a richness that carries down, and if you are inside the community, you recognize it. And for those of us, I'm Black, but I'm not, I'm not from the UK, and I'm not, my family's not from the Caribbean. So it's not that, but I can find some common ground in that, and I can recognize that and appreciate it for what it's doing. Yeah.
I love the fact that you were talking about kind of the way we're seeing these stories, and that they are showing sort of that everyday piece of life. And I think as we look at that parallel, as you said, with the LGBTQ space, we can point to tons of media that was generated in the 90s. Almost all of it was about people dying of HIV and AIDS, and that was the only story. And then we had like lots of stories about people who got rejected by their families and had a terrible time. But now we're actually seeing everyday lives in much more sort of expansive ways, and the everyday stuff, which I think that's what actually humanizes. It's not feel bad for my traumatized community that necessarily gets you there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you have to create bridges so people have a way to access the story. Because you can get to something universal. I think what's the nice thing is that we're seeing is that you can get to something universal, but the best way to do it is from something particular, right? And that, if that is the kind of change that happens in the industry, that would be the best possible change. It's sort of like, you can't say you want something universal and then start with what does that look, who is this imagined community? Who would that be for? And then you start there. You have to actually start from the particular and give people bridges into the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of the things that the article actually gets into are the systemic issues inherent in the entertainment industry that often keep some of this content sometimes from being made, but even when it's made, sometimes not getting the visibility that it necessarily should. So could you talk a little bit about what those barriers look like, and maybe why we're actually not talking about them beyond the fact that it's kind of complicated, and I think people are just getting to systemic racism now in many cases. So
right, it's true. There, one barrier I think is there, and we're seeing a lot less of it, which is nice. There are a couple barriers I want to talk about. One that's there is this idea about who the imagined audience is, and that it needs to play to whatever you put out needs to play to this imagined audience. Somehow that is, again, universal. There have always been multiple audiences who have really just had to suppress any kind of desire that they had to see themselves or to have, or to in any way relate to what was going on, to watch television, to go to the movies. And then what's happened now is sort of like, no, I'm here and I want something that speaks to me, that reflects me. And that's okay. And somebody else can build a bridge to my story. That would actually be a refreshing change to make it sort of like this is a freeing up of the idea of what the audience is. And then also who's supporting it, right? Because right, whether or not you imagine that I'm in the audience, it was always my money was being used to fund whatever work was being put out so that I would consume it, right? I was going to the movies with my friends always. So I was always supporting it. It's just that I wasn't being nourished by what I was seeing. That's one barrier. The other barrier, of course, is that we're seeing a lot less of because there are many more platforms now for people to work, is that we don't have just network television and we don't just have Hollywood studio system, in terms of access to the films, and then making sure that you had to get through those layers, right, to get to it. So there are many more avenues. So if something doesn't work here, you've got other places to shop it. But let's also be aware too that people still aren't always getting the stories out, because remember, Issa Rae comes up through a web series because she was just tired of going to auditions for things. I'm like, I don't want to play that. That is not going to spark joy for me, and it's not going to spark joy for who for the audience that I want to reach. So she starts the way she does until Hollywood came to her with the kind of gave her the kind of freedom that she wanted, freedom and control that she wanted to do her thing the way she wanted to do it, to give her a bigger platform. So yeah, it is shifting, but it still is also, it's an uneven shift that we're seeing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that there are sort of this vast variety of different kinds of outlets for distributing media, that has actually helped? That it has created some niches. So, I mean, I think about, if you look, we were talking about this earlier, if you go to Amazon right now, it has your Black History Month selections, and you can go to Netflix and you can go to Hulu and you can go down all these things. Do you think that has opened doors, or do you think in those spaces people are still subject to a lot of the challenges that they're facing sort of in the more mainstream?
I still think there are challenges. I don't doubt that in any way, right? There's always going to be some pushback on that, but it's just the sheer variety. And what you found, if you read stories about people getting their shows produced right now, what you will often hear is that we took it one place, that didn't work out, and so we took it to another place. It is the option to take it someplace else that is just really helpful. It's not that you're not going to encounter pushback, but it's that you're going to be able to take it someplace else. And then sometimes you will encounter different kind of barriers, because I just read a really fantastic article with the people who created Hintified, the Netflix show, and the kind of things that they had put into the contract that they wanted. They wanted a Latinx woman as the showrunner, and that just wasn't possible. So they got a biracial woman in as a showrunner. But that kind of, to be able to have that kind of control is absolutely important, and it really speaks to the kind of care that they wanted to do when producing that show. But yeah, that you can create some barriers, for yourself. It's sort of like, these are the things I want, and let's see if I can meet them. And then maybe the talent just isn't there yet, or maybe someone is really busy, because maybe there are only the 5 people, and those 5 people are busy. And it's also, we need to create a pipeline for more folks. So there are lots of things, but you do have really good stories. And if you want to get really deep, there's Charles King, who's created Macro, which is a really fascinating sort of incubator for Black filmmakers who want to put out content. And it really does help them negotiate the Hollywood system. So you might have a really great idea, but you're just really green, and you just need somebody in the room to help you, and also to help you to figure out what else you need, where else you can go to secure talent, so that you make sure that you are bringing other people along with you. So yeah, I
think we're seeing more and more of this. I mean, there was a lot of conversation a few years back about really established women in Hollywood starting to, in their contracts, demand that there is X number of women hired at these levels. And I think this is a huge opportunity for allyship. So it's not just the POC creators who are having to do this, but if it's those people who say that they are allies actually also doing it, it could really, really change this dynamic and give people, maybe who have a hard time breaking in, the exposure that they need, because now we are specifically looking for somebody with this set of skills and this background too. And it's bound to sort of influence it. I have to ask a question that I wasn't thinking about asking, and it sort of came to me as you were talking, which was, are there stories that you feel are not being told yet? Like, is there sort of a gap that you've noticed, or have we sort of gotten into a lot of those corners? I mean, you and I have both discussed how frustrating it is to only hear the negative ones, but is there anything that sort of immediately leaps to mind that you feel, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this in advance, but you said something that was so good I had to ask.
So, I mean, there are things, it would be nice if when those moments come up or someone is interested in telling particular kinds of history stories, it would be nice. Those still are not getting the kind of complete and full treatment that they deserve, or, that way. Because even I have a real issue with Judas and the Black Messiah. Not that it's a bad film, but that it focuses on Michael O'Neill, and it really does not give us Fred Hampton. Just go ahead and focus on the Black revolutionary figure. Go ahead and focus on somebody who was really thinking about politics in this really revolutionary way and really trying to bring people together across class and across race. Give us, if you're going to give us that story, then really, really dig into it and give us that story, and not have it just focus on the moment, leading up to, leading up to the moment when he's assassinated. Let's not do that. There are lots of ways that you can tell these stories in a better way. That's one thing that I definitely want to see.
And it would do such a service, I think, because a lot of those histories aren't even taught in classes, never mind in media. So, I mean, there's such an opportunity. I mean, we can identify a million different gaps. Yeah. I want to ask one more question, then I want to get Liz to come back in and join us and talk a little bit more about what she saw too. So, of the nominees that you saw this year, and I know we are sort of constrained by talking about those nominees, but I'm actually going to go outside, even outside of that. Are you seeing more stories that are not just taking things on a single plane? So not just talking about being, for example, Black, but maybe being Black and LGBT, or being Latinx and a person with a disability. So are we seeing more of that, or are we still pretty much focused on singular experiences?
Well, in terms of the awards, we're only really focused on singular experiences. They're still really focused on tell me that story, which I can really understand what that is. It has a very clear through line for me. That's what the awards, that's always been a downside to thinking about any kind of diversity and inclusion in terms of awards, right? Because they'll never go for anything really experimental, and some things just fall apart, even just in terms of what the industry can do with them. Because, I hate to harp on McQueen. I do love Steve McQueen, but I do watch other folks. We'll talk about some other people in a minute. But McQueen's really wonderful film, Widows, just could not find any purchase. And that was really hard for me. But it wasn't giving you anything. It's sort of like, no, it's not just a heist movie. It is not your standard, women's empowerment narrative, right? But it has those elements, but he's also just giving you a really great story with fantastic acting, some really wonderful tension in it, and just exactly right. It's such a rich story that's really developed, but no, that kind of thing, no, it's not. It really, I hate that it couldn't find an audience. Certainly wasn't going to find any love in the award season, but
yeah. I'm going to see if Liz wants to come back in, because I know that she has her list and she is itching to join us for this conversation.
Chomping at the bit.
Have you been constantly getting ready to put yourself back in?
I'm like, oh, can I now? Can I?
Yelling at the TV? So Liz, I'm going to ask you, what was missing from the list that you think should have been there?
Well, I think there are a lot of things on the list. I mean, I think we all talked about Michaela Coel's show, which just should have been nominated for all of the things. I Will Destroy You. Should have been nominated for all of the things, should be planning to win all the things. She's since gone on to get some nominations, but there's an example of someone who had already created a show that was somewhat successful, that then pitched it to, and then she brought this show to someone, and they offered her like $1 million as long as she would give up any ownership of the show, and she refused and walked and got another deal somewhere else. And so smart to do that, to retain control of her product. I mean, it's hard to call art a product, but it is a commodity. It is a business, and she's a creator and should be paid what she's earned for that work. And so if you haven't watched it, do yourself a favor, but it's not an easy show.
That's what we were talking about, that it wasn't easy stories. Like it's a hard one to watch at some points.
It is a hard one to watch, but I just feel like there is, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because that show was phenomenal, amazing, but it was also the show that we were not ready for. And also really, we're just not worthy of that kind of brilliance. Actually, someone gave us something that is doing that kind of very blended, beautiful intersectional kind of storytelling, and we get a really wonderful example of it, and we just weren't ready for it. But I do think the kind of messiness that she has in that show should have been the kind of bridge to bring people in, because that should have got people talking. What did you think? What did you make of that, right? What about this decision that was made? I just don't understand how that did not create that kind of conversation that I wanted to see. I wanted that to really be a pitch, and like, I wanted to see those think pieces coming out week after week after each episode, and they just weren't there. And that really bothered me and annoyed me. But
yeah.
And I didn't find it hard to watch from a this is difficult, I need to start a few times. I meant it was hard to watch for subject matter, but I binged that thing from beginning to end without a stop in sight. So yeah, I think she's amazing. There's a few others. A show called Work in Progress on Showtime by Abby McEnany. She's came up through Chicago Improv. It is a brilliant show full of queer BIPOC representation. It is authentic and raw and funny and beautiful, and got a second season, which again shows you something, that if you give somebody the power to create authentic content, here's what I think. We tend to think audiences want one type of story, right? So this must be a Black story. This must be an LGBT story, and that no one outside of that community will have any interest in that story. Instead of saying, no, I'm going to tell a compelling story because themes of humanness are universal. Yeah. We will all find the humanity in every story. It will be personal to us, even as we learn about the lived experiences of other people. And I think that's a big mistake that big companies make.
Yeah, exactly. Or there's the wrong way to go about it. And I know Jean Marie and I talked a little bit about it, what I call ticking, the shows that tick, they need to tick every box. This was the issue, with Black Lightning, and also a little bit with Hintified as well. It's sort of like, it's got all of, they've got all of these strands going, and then they also have lesbian characters, both of them did. And it's sort of like, okay, I get that you want to make sure that, that you're, that you are being respectful, to anybody who might be watching, and also that these are experiences within these communities that are happening. But give yourself a little space and a room and a grace, and to introduce things as it feels like it's necessary to what's happening in the show. You don't need to tick every box and jump out, and come out really strongly that way. There's a graceful way to do all of that if you want to get into it.
Interesting, because we were talking about Black Lightning earlier, and I love that show. But sometimes in those CW shows, they have done so much. I feel like it's almost like there have been years of discrimination, and so we are going to make up for it with this superhero today. And I have
episode.
Sorry. And I think it's fantastic. Although sometimes you sit there and you're like, really? It's a little bit much. It's actually a little bit too much Rainbow Coalition to even be real to me anymore. Admittedly, I know we're talking about superheroes.
I love the conversation you were having about creators and where creators are being found, because in order to diversify finding creators, much like the way we do inclusion, where it's like, we can't say we built a thing, no one's coming. I think we also have to do that too. There are a lot of companies that are building wonderful programs to bolster and reinforce and bring in queer creators and BIPOC creators, but you have to extend your outreach beyond colleges and universities. There are wonderful theater companies dedicated to these artists. There are spoken word venues that are dedicated to these artists, and all of them have creative material that have potential to be developed and broadened. And I think we have to go where those creators are creating, and not just build a thing and hope they will show up, because they might not even hear about your great program.
But that actually brings up kind of a question that I wanted to get to. And I think Liz and Leticia, you can come at this from sort of different angles. We all know what we want to see. And we all know that people are creating what we want to see. It's not a matter of it doesn't exist. It exists. So can we talk about some of the ways, you were like, we have to go to these creators, but what are some of the ways sort of the everyday person can influence this dialogue? I mean, obviously what we purchase and don't purchase goes, that counts for a lot. But can we quickly talk about a few specific ways? Because I think a lot of people want to do something when this is over, and I'd love to give people something to do.
Okay. Yeah, this might not be the best one. Best one for me. The one thing I will say, yes, absolutely. What you choose to watch, more importantly, what you choose to pay for is absolutely fundamentally important. And it's also, now that we are in a social media age, is like what you are actually talking about online and what you're tagging in terms of that conversation, and really helping people to understand what that who the audience is and what the audience wants to see. We cannot underestimate the power of that kind of conversation. So those things are absolutely vital and important.
Liz?
I agree. And that was going to be my first one, which is, putting our money where our mouths are, supporting creators is really important, especially on smaller. And then there are outlets like TikTok and YouTube where it sounds, weird maybe, but there are incredible creative people using those outlets because they don't cost anything. And if you get the right authentic thing, millions of people will see it. And I think those are going to become those. And in fact, to prove that point, that one of the big unions, SAG-AFTRA, just enacted or wrote up a contract for content creators because they recognize that those content creators should have union connection and protection. Like, to me, that is the loudest example of where we're going to find creators, because now they'll have protection for their art.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing too, in terms of one thing I don't want to miss out on in this conversation, is the way that current people who have contracts and who are getting their shows produced and who are getting movies made are holding the door open for other people. So they're letting people know that I know so-and-so, I have access to this person, or I have a friend of mine or somebody like that. Just, could we please do something for them? And so that I love about this particular moment that we're in is that you do really see that people elevating other people that they know, and really using any kind of brand that they have right now, or any kind of cachet, to help somebody else. And that is what's really wonderful in this moment. And so it's people who are doing the same work that they do, and it's also other people that you might know who might be in a different trade union, but really bringing people along. That's a great thing.
Joey Soloway does that. Joey Soloway has done that with talent. Actually, Lena Dunham has a new show coming up called Generation, but it's not really Lena Dunham's show. It's by a young person named Zelda Barnes, who developed the show. They're 19 years old, young queer creator. It's about queer kids of color in Southern California. But Lena Dunham mentored Zelda to tell Zelda's story, not Lena Dunham's story.
And I think this is the exciting thing. Now that we have people who literally are legit established in some of these places, we do have people to do this. And it's not just about, I think, opening the door in terms of immediate opportunities, but I mean, one good tweet from any one of these powerful creators could be the thing that gets you the visibility, that suddenly you are talking to people who are going to then say, well, let's talk about maybe producing this show. And I think that's sort of, as terrifying as social media can be sometimes, I think that is the amazing positive aspect of social media in this, that I think we can all take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we have about 2 minutes left. I do know that we have had a lot of people commenting. One thing that quickly came up, and we don't have 2 minutes to talk about it, but somebody asked, is that, the line between including people and tokenism. I think that is often, especially as we get into that checkbox area, I think that that's a really tricky one. Any quick comments on that? And that's not a quick topic, that's a whole show.
It is, yeah, it's not a quick topic. One thing is that one of the hallmarks, I think, of this particular moment is that we have not fully moved away from tokenism, but it's certainly we're moving in the right direction, actually, certainly where that is, because that seemed to have been stalled for the longest time. As long as we have people here and we can tick those boxes off, then we must be doing a something. And this is where, you know, all the language about representation is something, but it's not everything comes in. And so, yeah, it's something, but it's not what we need. And so we're moving away from that, but it's still there. You're not gonna.
Yeah, I think it's something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
We are just about at time. I know Jamie is back there. She is running this for us while we run our mouths. But I just want to thank you both for being here. This again was so much fun and went entirely too fast. Again, we need like an after hours one. Someday we're going to really do it. But thank you both for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And as we always say here at Something to Talk About, this week, make sure that you run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. And please continue to wear your masks. We will be back next week with another episode. We can't wait to see you again. If you need help or support, please visit us at pflag.org. We'll see you next week, everybody.